All stories posted on our channel are stories from our subscribers and created by us based on real events we've experienced and witnessed. We post new stories every day for your entertainment, that we hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
The words hit me before I could process them, landing with a force that seemed disproportionate to the simple act of reaching for my wife's shoulder. I had just come home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, exhausted in the way that only emergency room physicians understand, the bone-deep weariness that comes from holding lives in your hands while death circles like a patient predator. My name is Fletcher Donovan. I was 44 years old, a trauma surgeon at St. Augustine Medical Center in suburban Chicago, and until that Tuesday evening in late September, I believed I understood the fundamental landscape of my marriage. "Get out," Meredith said, pulling away from my touch with a violence that seemed to ripple through her entire body. "I've been touched enough today." The words hung in the air between us, suspended like something physical I could almost see. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, my hand still extended toward the space where her shoulder had been, my mind struggling to reconcile what I had heard with any context that made sense. "What?" I asked, though I had heard her perfectly. The question was less about comprehension and more about disbelief, a reflex, a request for her to take back words that had already done their damage. Meredith was sitting on the edge of our bed, still dressed in the silk blouse and fitted skirt she wore to her job as a marketing director at a pharmaceutical company downtown. Her auburn hair was slightly disheveled, her makeup smudged in ways that suggested a long day, and there was something in her posture, a tension, a defensiveness that I had never seen before in 15 years of marriage. I said, "I don't want to be touched right now." Her voice was calmer this time, but the edge remained. "I had a difficult day. I need space." "Okay," I said slowly, retreating a step into the hallway. "I was just coming to say hello. I didn't realize—" "You never realize." The accusation was sharp, sudden. "You're never here, Fletcher. You're always at the hospital, always saving other people while your own family falls apart, and then you come home expecting everything to be exactly as you left it." The attack seemed to come from nowhere, or perhaps from somewhere I had been refusing to see. Meredith and I had been struggling, I knew that. The distance between us had been growing for months, maybe years, accumulating in small silences and missed connections until it had become something vast and difficult to name. But this felt different. This felt like something more than marital strain. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was apologizing for. "Let me give you some space. I'll be downstairs if you need me." I turned to leave, and that was when I saw it. Her phone was on the nightstand, screen illuminated by an incoming message. I wouldn't normally have looked. Privacy in our marriage had always been respected, a boundary we had established early and maintained throughout. But something about the moment, about her words, about the strange electricity in the air, made me glance at the screen as I passed. The message was from a contact named simply D. The preview showed only a fragment. "Tonight was incredible. I can still feel you." The rest was cut off, hidden behind the lock screen that protected the full content. But those words, those 7 words visible in the notification preview, were enough to freeze me in place. "Fletcher?" Meredith's voice had changed again, sharpening with concern. "What's wrong?" I stood motionless, staring at the phone, watching as the screen dimmed and went dark after a few seconds. The message notification remained visible in the status bar, a small icon that represented something massive, a detonation waiting to happen, a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Nothing," I heard myself say. "Just tired. Long shift." I walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and into the kitchen where our 16-year-old daughter Tessa was doing homework at the island counter. She looked up as I entered, her expression shifting to concern as she registered something in my face. "Dad, you okay?" "Fine, sweetheart, just exhausted." I poured myself a glass of water and drank it standing at the sink, my back to my daughter, my mind racing through implications I wasn't ready to examine. "I've been touched enough today." The words replayed in my memory, taking on new meaning in light of what I had seen on the phone. She hadn't been talking about my touch, or even about being touched in general. She had been talking about something specific, something recent, something that had happened before I came home. Someone named D had touched my wife, and apparently it had been incredible. I went through the motions of the evening, helping Tessa with a calculus problem I barely focused on, eating the dinner that had been left for me in the refrigerator, showering and changing into comfortable clothes. Meredith remained in the bedroom throughout, the door closed. Her presence felt through absence rather than interaction. Around 10 o'clock, I stood outside our bedroom door, hand raised to knock, and then lowered it without making contact. I couldn't face her yet. I couldn't pretend everything was normal while those 7 words burned in my mind. Instead, I went to the guest room down the hall, the room I had used occasionally when my shifts disrupted Meredith's sleep, and lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling while the architecture of my life rearranged itself around a truth I wasn't yet ready to accept. Tonight was incredible. I can still feel you. Someone was touching my wife, someone named D, and whatever was happening between them had been going on long enough for the contact to be saved in her phone, for messages to be exchanged, for encounters to be planned and executed while I worked 16-hour days, believing that my marriage, while imperfect, was fundamentally intact. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the guest room bed and waited for morning, my mind cycling through memories and moments, searching for signs I had missed, evidence I had ignored. The late nights Meredith attributed to work demands, the increased attention to her appearance, the gym membership she had started using more frequently, the new lingerie I had glimpsed in her drawer but never seen her wear for me. All of it took on new significance now, pieces of a puzzle I hadn't known I was assembling. By the time dawn began to lighten the windows, I had made a decision. I needed to know the truth, the full truth, not just the fragment I had glimpsed on her phone. I needed to understand what was happening in my marriage before I could decide what to do about it. The investigation would begin that morning. I called in sick for the first time in 3 years, a decision that surprised the scheduling coordinator enough that she asked twice if I was certain. "Dr. Donovan never calls in sick," she said, as if stating a law of nature that I was somehow violating. But I confirmed my absence and ended the call, sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot where I had driven on autopilot before remembering that I wasn't going to work today. The September morning was cool and overcast, the kind of grey weather that matched my internal state. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, watching hospital staff come and go through the main entrance, and tried to formulate a plan. What I knew, Meredith was receiving intimate messages from someone saved in her phone as D. The nature of the messages suggested a physical relationship. "I can still feel you" was not language used between colleagues or casual acquaintances. Her reaction when I tried to touch her, combined with the timing of the message, suggested that something had happened that very day before I came home from work. What I didn't know, who D was, how long this had been going on, whether it was a single encounter or an ongoing affair, whether Meredith intended to continue, to confess, or to end things, whether our marriage could survive whatever the truth turned out to be. I needed information. The most obvious source was Meredith herself. A direct confrontation, a demand for honesty, the kind of difficult conversation that marriages are supposed to be able to withstand. But I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to hear her confirm what I suspected, wasn't ready to watch her construct lies if she chose to deny it, wasn't ready to navigate the emotional minefield of accusation and defense. First, I needed to know what I was dealing with. I needed facts, evidence, understanding. I drove to a coffee shop several miles from our neighborhood, somewhere I wouldn't risk running into anyone we knew, and sat with a laptop and a cup of coffee that grew cold while I thought through my options. The simplest approach would be to check phone records. Meredith and I shared a family plan, and I had access to the account. I logged in and navigated to the call and text history for her number, my stomach tightening as the data loaded. The record showed hundreds of communications over the past month, calls and texts to numbers I recognized, work contacts, friends, family, and several I didn't. One number appeared with unusual frequency, calls lasting anywhere from 2 minutes to over an hour, text messages exchanged multiple times per day, a pattern of communication that suggested something more than professional interaction. I copied the number and searched for it online, finding nothing useful. It was a mobile number with no public association. I considered calling it, then decided against it. What would I say? "Hello. Are you sleeping with my wife?" The absurdity of the situation struck me, and I almost laughed, would have laughed, if the pain beneath the absurdity wasn't so overwhelming. I thought about hiring a private investigator. I had seen enough TV dramas to know this was an option, though the reality of it, paying a stranger to follow my wife, to photograph her coming and going from unknown locations, to document the destruction of my marriage, felt sordid in ways I couldn't quite accept. Instead, I did what physicians do. I gathered more data. Over the following days, I became an observer in my own home. I paid attention to Meredith's schedule, noting when she left for work and when she returned, tracking the discrepancies between what she told me and what seemed plausible. She claimed late meetings on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, but her phone records showed no calls to or from work during those hours, only communications with the unknown number. I watched her interactions with our daughter, looking for signs of guilt or distraction. I monitored her moods, her energy levels, the small details of her appearance that might indicate whether she was dressing for work or for someone else. And I began, subtly, to create opportunities for her to reveal herself. "How was the meeting last night?" I asked one Friday morning, referencing a supposed work event she had mentioned. "Fine, boring, the usual budget discussions." Her answer came easily, without hesitation, suggesting either truth or practiced deception. "Who was there?" "The whole marketing team, plus some people from finance." She looked up from her coffee, her expression neutral. "Why the sudden interest in my work?" "Just curious. I feel like I've been disconnected lately. From you, from what's happening in your life." Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or suspicion that I was probing for reasons she couldn't safely ask about. "You've been working a lot. We've both been busy. Maybe we should make more time for each other. Have dinner, just the two of us, reconnect." "Maybe," she said, but her tone was non-committal, her attention already returning to her phone, to messages I couldn't see, to a conversation with someone I couldn't identify. 2 weeks into my investigation, I had accumulated significant circumstantial evidence, but nothing definitive. I knew Meredith was communicating frequently with someone, knew she was lying about her schedule, knew something had changed in our marriage that went beyond the ordinary distance we had allowed to develop, but I didn't know who, or how serious, or whether confrontation would yield honesty or deeper deception. The breakthrough came on a Thursday evening. Meredith had mentioned another late meeting, her third that week, and I had nodded without comment, already planning to track her movements. But instead of following her car from the house, I decided to check her tablet, which she used primarily for work, but occasionally synced with her phone. She had left it charging on the kitchen counter, and while Tessa was occupied with homework in her room, I picked it up and navigated to the messaging app that might be connected to her accounts. It was. The messages were all there, months of conversation with the contact saved as D, whose full name was revealed in the message header, Derek Hutchinson. I read through them with a mixture of horror and compulsion, unable to stop even as each message drove the knife deeper. The relationship had begun 6 months ago, at a conference in Denver where they had both been speakers. It had started as professional admiration, evolved into personal connection, and eventually crossed into physical intimacy during a subsequent conference in Atlanta. Since then, they had been meeting regularly, sometimes during Meredith's late meetings, sometimes during supposed business trips that were actually rendezvous at hotels chosen for their discretion. The messages were explicit at times, romantic at others, and throughout them was a consistent thread. Meredith was unhappy in her marriage, felt neglected and unappreciated, and had found in Derek something she had been missing for years. I set down the tablet and stood motionless in the kitchen, the life I thought I knew, collapsing around me like a building imploding in slow motion. My wife was having an affair, had been having an affair for 6 months, and according to the messages I had just read, she was considering leaving me for him. The days following my discovery were the most difficult of my life. I moved through the routines of work and home like an automaton, performing the functions required of me while my internal world burned. I operated on patience, made life and death decisions in the trauma bay, came home to have dinner with my daughter, and exchanged pleasantries with my wife, all while carrying knowledge that made every interaction feel like a performance in a play whose script I no longer understood. I didn't confront Meredith, not yet. The pain was too raw, too overwhelming to allow for the kind of controlled conversation that such a confrontation would require. I needed time to process, to understand my own feelings, to decide what I wanted before demanding that she choose. Instead, I continued reading the messages, compulsively returning to the tablet whenever Meredith was away, torturing myself with details I simultaneously needed and couldn't bear to know. I learned that Derek was also married, a pharmaceutical executive whose work brought him into contact with marketing professionals like Meredith. His messages revealed a man who was charming and attentive, who remembered details about Meredith's life that I had apparently been too busy to notice, who made her feel seen in ways I haven't felt in years. That last phrase appeared in one of Meredith's messages, and it struck me with particular force. She hadn't felt seen by me, her husband of 15 years, the father of her child, the man who had pledged to love and honor her until death. She had been right beside me, and I hadn't seen her. The guilt was almost as overwhelming as the betrayal. Had I driven her to this? Had my dedication to my work, my long hours at the hospital, my assumption that the marriage would sustain itself without active attention, had all of that created the conditions for her to seek elsewhere what I wasn't providing at home? The answer, I realized, was complicated. Yes, I had been absent. Yes, I had prioritized work over marriage. Yes, I had failed to nurture the connection that had brought us together in the first place. But Meredith had made choices too. Instead of confronting me, instead of demanding change, instead of giving our marriage the fighting chance it deserved, she had turned to someone else. She had lied, deceived, betrayed, not once in a moment of weakness, but repeatedly over 6 months of deliberate infidelity. I found myself oscillating between these poles, guilt and anger, responsibility and blame, unable to settle on a narrative that made sense of what had happened. The uncertainty was exhausting, a cognitive load that depleted me more thoroughly than any surgical marathon ever had. My work began to suffer, not dramatically. I was still competent, still capable, but my colleagues noticed a change. Dr. Sarah Chen, a fellow trauma surgeon who had become something of a friend over years of shared shifts, pulled me aside after a particularly difficult case. "Fletcher, what's going on? You've been off for weeks." "I'm fine, just tired." "That's what you always say. But I've worked with you for 8 years. This is different." I looked at her, really looked, in a way I had stopped doing with most people since the discovery, and saw genuine concern in her eyes. Sarah was in her late 30s, dedicated to her career in ways that had prevented her from building the kind of personal life I had once thought I possessed. She was brilliant, caring, and had always been someone I could talk to about the professional challenges we shared. But this was different. This was personal, private, shameful in ways that made confession feel impossible. "Marriage stuff," I said finally, offering a partial truth. "Meredith and I are going through a rough patch." "I'm sorry to hear that. Do you want to talk about it?" "Not really, not yet, but thank you for asking." She nodded, respecting the boundary I had drawn, but her expression remained concerned. "If you need anything, time off, someone to cover your shifts, just someone to listen, I'm here." I appreciate that. But I didn't take her up on the offer. I couldn't. The shame of admitting what was happening, that my wife had found me so inadequate that she had sought fulfillment elsewhere, was too great. So I continued alone, carrying my secret like a weight that grew heavier with each passing day. Tessa noticed too, though her observations were less direct. She started checking in on me more frequently, asking if I was okay, offering to bring me coffee or sit with me while I reviewed patient files at home. My 16-year-old daughter, navigating her own complex adolescent world, had sensed that her father was struggling and was trying, in her limited way, to provide support. "Dad," she said one evening, appearing in the doorway of the study where I had retreated after dinner. "Are you and Mom fighting? What makes you ask that? You barely talk to each other, and when you do, it's like, I don't know, like you're not really talking, like you're both somewhere else." I set down the file I'd been pretending to read and gave her my full attention. "Marriages go through difficult periods sometimes. It doesn't mean anything is permanently wrong. Is something temporarily wrong? Maybe, but it's nothing for you to worry about. Whatever happens between your mother and me, we both love you. That won't change. Whatever happens." The alarm in her voice was immediate. "Dad, are you getting divorced?" "I don't know, sweetheart. I honestly don't know." The admission surprised me as much as it surprised her. I hadn't consciously decided anything, hadn't reached any conclusions about what the discovery meant for our marriage's future. But saying the words out loud made me realize that I was, at some level, preparing for an ending I couldn't yet imagine accepting. Tessa sat down across from me, her young face serious with concern that no 16-year-old should have to carry. "What happened? Did you do something? Did she—" "This isn't something I can discuss with you. It's between your mother and me. But it affects me too. If you're thinking about divorce, don't I have a right to know why?" She was right in a way. Divorce would transform her life as much as ours, splitting her time between two households, forcing her to navigate parental tensions, reshaping her understanding of love and commitment and what marriage meant. But she was also wrong. Some truths were too damaging to share with a child, even a child as mature as Tessa. When there's something definite to share, we'll share it. Right now, your mother and I are working through some issues. That's all you need to know. That's not fair. You're right, it's not fair. A lot of things aren't fair, and you're going to learn that more and more as you get older. But sometimes protecting people means not telling them everything, even when they want to know. Tessa stared at me for a long moment, then stood and walked to the door. She paused at the threshold, looking back with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I love you, Dad. Whatever's happening, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart, more than you know." She left, and I sat alone in the study, surrounded by the artifacts of a life that suddenly felt unfamiliar. The photographs on the walls, the books on the shelves, the small decorative objects that Meredith and I had accumulated over 15 years of marriage, all of it looked the same as it always had, but the meaning had changed. The context had shifted, and I wasn't sure I would ever see any of it the same way again. The confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after I first saw the message on Meredith's phone. Tessa was at a friend's house, giving us the privacy that such a conversation required, though Meredith didn't know a conversation was coming. As far as she knew, it was an ordinary Sunday, distinguished only by the unusual amount of time I had been spending at home. I found her in the kitchen, preparing ingredients for a dinner we would probably never eat. She looked up as I entered, her expression neutral, unaware that the next few minutes would change everything. "Meredith, we need to talk." Something in my tone must have signaled the gravity of what was coming, because her hands stilled and her posture shifted, a subtle defensive adjustment that confirmed, before a single word was spoken, that she had something to defend against. About what? About Derek Hutchinson. The color drained from her face. It happened so quickly, so completely, that for a moment I thought she might faint. She gripped the edge of the counter, steadying herself, and I watched as the masks she had been wearing for months fell away, revealing the raw fear beneath. "How do you—" She stopped, recognizing the futility of denial. "How long have you known?" 3 weeks, since the night you told me you'd been touched enough today." She flinched at the words, hearing them now the way I had heard them, as a confession disguised as a complaint, an inadvertent revelation of what she had been trying to hide. "I saw the message," I continued, "on your phone. Tonight was incredible. I can still feel you. I've read everything since then. Your tablet syncs with your messaging apps." "Fletcher, don't." My voice was harder than I intended, but I couldn't soften it. The anger I had been suppressing for 3 weeks was finally breaking through, overwhelming the careful control I had maintained. "Don't apologize, don't explain, don't try to make this something other than what it is. You've been having an affair for 6 months. You've lied to me every single day. You've made me feel like the distance between us was my fault, when all along you were giving yourself to someone else. It is your fault." Her voice was quiet, but firm, and her words carried a conviction that surprised me. "Not the affair. That's my fault, my choice, my mistake. But the distance? That's on both of us, Fletcher. That's on years of you prioritizing everything except our marriage." So that's your justification. I worked too much, so you found someone else?" "It's not a justification. There is no justification. I'm just trying to help you understand." "I don't want to understand. I want to know what happens now." Meredith was silent for a moment, her eyes searching my face, as if looking for something she could hold on to. "What do you want to happen?" The question stopped me. In 3 weeks of investigation and agonizing, I had never actually considered what I wanted. I'd been so focused on understanding the betrayal, on cataloging the evidence, on managing my own emotional response, that I had never asked myself the fundamental question: what did I want my life to look like after this? Did I want to save the marriage? Was it even possible to save something that had been so thoroughly damaged? Could I ever look at Meredith again without seeing Derek's face, without imagining his hands on her body, without hearing the messages they had exchanged? Or did I want to end it, file for divorce, divide our assets, establish custody arrangements, and start over as a single father in my mid-40s? The prospect was terrifying, not just the logistics, but the admission of failure, the acknowledgement that the life I had built was based on foundations that couldn't hold. "I don't know what I want," I admitted. "A week ago, I would have said I wanted our marriage to work, but now, I don't know if that's possible." "It could be possible, if we both want it." "Do you want it? From the messages I read, it sounded like you were planning to leave." Meredith took a shaky breath. I was confused. I still am. Derek offered me something I had been missing: attention, connection, the feeling of being desired. But that doesn't mean I don't love you, Fletcher. That doesn't mean our marriage is worthless. Those messages didn't sound like the words of someone who loves her husband. I know. I said things I shouldn't have said, felt things I shouldn't have felt, but feelings aren't the same as choices. I chose to marry you. I chose to build a life with you. I chose to have a child with you. Those choices still mean something. And you chose to betray all of it. That choice means something too. We stood in the kitchen, separated by a few feet of space and an infinite distance of broken trust. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting shadows that seemed to divide the room into territories, hers and mine, past and future, what was and what might still be. "I need time," I said finally. "I can't make decisions right now. I can't promise forgiveness or commitment or anything else. I just need time to think. I understand, and I need you to end it, with Derek, completely and permanently. If there's any chance of saving this marriage, that has to be the first step." Meredith nodded slowly. "I already ended it 2 weeks ago." "Why?" "Because the night you saw that message, the night you almost touched me and I pushed you away, I realized what I was doing. I was destroying everything we had built, everything that actually mattered, for something that could never be more than a temporary escape." She met my eyes, and I saw tears forming. I've been trying to work up the courage to tell you, to confess, but I was so afraid of losing you that I kept putting it off. You were afraid of losing me after 6 months of lying. I know how it sounds, but the affair was never about wanting to leave you. It was about wanting to feel alive again, wanted again, seen again. Derek gave me that for a while, but it wasn't real. What we have, what we've built, that's real. And I was destroying it for something that was never going to last. I wanted to believe her. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies and the months of deception, part of me still wanted to believe that our marriage could be salvaged, that the foundation was strong enough to rebuild upon. But another part, the part that had read every message, that had tracked every lie, that had felt the searing pain of discovering infidelity, that part wasn't ready to trust anything she said. I need to go, I said. I can't be in this house right now. Where will you go? I don't know. A hotel. Somewhere I can think. What should I tell Tessa? Tell her I had an emergency at the hospital. Tell her whatever you need to tell her. I'll figure out the truth later. I grabbed my keys and wallet and walked out of the house, leaving Meredith standing in the kitchen with her unanswered questions and her tearful confessions. The confrontation was over, but the real work, the work of deciding what came next, had only just begun. I checked into a hotel near the hospital, a business establishment that offered anonymity and the kind of impersonal comfort I needed. The room was generic, beige walls, standard furniture, a view of the parking lot, but it provided what I was looking for, space to think without the constant reminder of the life that was unraveling. For 3 days, I barely left the room. I ordered room service, slept when exhaustion overwhelmed me, and spent the waking hours trying to understand what I wanted and what was possible. The question of forgiveness dominated my thoughts. Could I forgive Meredith? Was forgiveness even the right framework for what had happened? Some betrayals, I believed, were simply too large to forgive, not because the injured party was unwilling, but because forgiveness implied a return to something that no longer existed. The marriage I had before the affair was gone, destroyed not by my discovery, but by Meredith's choices. Whatever came next would have to be something new, built on different foundations. But did I want to build something new? That was the harder question. I had invested 15 years in this marriage, had raised a daughter within it, had organized my entire life around the assumption that Meredith and I would grow old together. Walking away meant acknowledging that all of that investment had failed to produce what it was supposed to produce. A lasting partnership, a stable home, a love that could withstand the pressures of modern life. I thought about Tessa. How would divorce affect her? She was 16, old enough to understand what was happening, young enough to be permanently shaped by it. I had seen the children of divorced colleagues navigate the aftermath. The shuttling between houses, the divided loyalties, the subtle and not-so-subtle wounds that carried into adulthood. I didn't want that for my daughter, but I also didn't want to model a marriage of resentment and pretense, a partnership held together by convenience rather than love. Tessa would learn about relationships from watching us, and what lesson would she learn if we stayed together only because leaving seemed too hard? On the second day, I called Sarah Chen. "Fletcher, what's going on? You've missed 2 shifts, and no one knows where you are. I'm at a hotel. I need a few more days. What happened? Is it Meredith? She had an affair. I found out 3 weeks ago. I just confronted her about it." Hey, the silence on the line lasted long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Then Sarah spoke, her voice soft with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should try to save the marriage or end it. I don't know if I can forgive her or if I should. Those aren't questions I can answer for you. I know. I just needed to tell someone. I've been carrying this alone for 3 weeks, and it's been destroying me. Do you want to talk? In person, I mean. I can come to where you are." I hesitated. Sarah was a colleague, a friend, but inviting her to my hotel room felt like crossing a line, especially given the circumstances. The last thing I needed was for my attempt to process Meredith's affair to be misinterpreted as the beginning of one of my own. Let's meet at the coffee shop on Maple, the one near the hospital. I'll be there in an hour. Sarah was exactly who I needed to talk to, someone outside the situation who could offer perspective without personal investment. Over coffee that grew cold while we talked, I told her everything: the discovery, the investigation, the confrontation, the impossible choice that lay before me. "What do you think?" I asked when I had finished. "What would you do?" "It doesn't matter what I would do. My circumstances aren't your circumstances. But if they were, if you found out that someone you loved had been lying to you for 6 months, had given themselves to someone else while pretending everything was normal, what would you do?" Sarah considered the question, her fingers wrapped around her coffee cup even though she wasn't drinking. "I think I would ask myself whether I could ever trust them again. Not whether they promised to be trustworthy, but whether I could actually believe them. Because without trust, a marriage is just two people sharing space. I don't know if I can trust her. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at her without seeing the lies. Then maybe that's your answer. But walking away feels like giving up, like admitting defeat. Ending something that isn't working isn't defeat. It's recognition of reality. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is acknowledge that something is broken beyond repair. And sometimes things can be repaired. Sometimes people change, grow, become better versions of themselves. True, the question is whether you believe that's possible here with Meredith. Do you believe she can change? I thought about the woman I had married 15 years ago, the ambitious, passionate, loving woman who had chosen me despite the demands of my career, who had built a home with me, who had raised our daughter with dedication and grace. I thought about the woman she had become, or perhaps always been underneath, someone capable of sustained deception, of systematic betrayal, of pursuing her own needs at the expense of everything we had promised each other. Were they the same person? Was the woman who had the affair the same woman I had fallen in love with, or had something changed along the way? I don't know, I admitted. I genuinely don't know. Then maybe you need more time to find out. Sarah's advice was compassionate but not directive. She understood that this was a decision I had to make for myself, based on my own values and priorities. But talking to her helped clarify my thinking, helped me see that the question wasn't simply stay or go, but something more nuanced. What kind of life do I want? And is it possible to achieve that with Meredith? I returned to the hotel and spent the rest of the day writing in a journal I had purchased at a nearby drugstore. I wrote about my marriage, the early years of passion and discovery, the middle years of stability and growing distance, the recent months of betrayal and pain. I wrote about what I had wanted and what I had received, about the gap between expectation and reality that had gradually widened until it became an unbridgeable chasm. And I wrote about Tessa, about my fears for her future, my hopes for her happiness, my determination to be a good father regardless of what happened with her mother. Whatever I decided about my marriage, my relationship with my daughter, would remain the most important thing in my life. By the end of the 3rd day, I had reached a decision, not a final decision. I wasn't ready for that, but a next step, a way forward that would give me the information I needed to make the ultimate choice. I was going to try. Not to forgive immediately, not to pretend the affair hadn't happened, but to genuinely try to rebuild what had been destroyed. I would give Meredith a chance to prove that she could be trustworthy, that her remorse was genuine, that our marriage was worth saving. But I would do it with clear conditions and firm boundaries. And if those conditions weren't met, if trust couldn't be rebuilt, I would walk away, not with anger, but with the sad acceptance that some things, once broken, cannot be mended. I checked out of the hotel and drove home. Meredith was waiting for me when I arrived, her face showing the evidence of 3 sleepless days that had apparently been as difficult for her as they had been for me. She stood as I entered the living room, her posture uncertain, her eyes searching my face for some indication of what I had decided. "I'm back," I said, stating the obvious because I didn't know how else to begin. "I wasn't sure you would be." Neither was I. We stood in silence for a moment, the distance between us feeling larger than the few feet of carpet that separated us. Then I gestured toward the couch, and we sat at opposite ends, leaving space for the conversation that needed to happen. "I've decided to try," I said, "to work on our marriage, to see if what's been broken can be repaired, but I have conditions. Anything. Don't say that until you hear what they are." Meredith nodded, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. "First, complete transparency. No more secrets, no more lies. I need access to your phone, your email, your schedule, everything. Not because I want to be controlling, but because I need to rebuild trust, and that requires verification." "I understand. I'll give you whatever you need." "Second, couples therapy. We start immediately, and we commit to it for at least a year. Our marriage had problems before the affair. Distance, communication issues, neglect on both our parts. If we're going to rebuild, we need professional help to address those underlying problems. I've already researched therapists. I can have us scheduled within the week. Third, complete separation from Derek. No contact of any kind, no calls, no texts, no innocent conversations at professional events. If maintaining your career requires interaction with him, you find a new career. I've already resigned from my position. I start at a different company next month." This surprised me. She had made changes before I returned, before she knew whether I would give her a second chance. It suggested that her remorse was genuine, that she had understood the gravity of what she had done, even without my conditions demanding it. "Finally," I continued, "understanding that this process has no guaranteed outcome, I'm agreeing to try, not to forgive. If the trust can't be rebuilt, if I find myself unable to move past what happened, the marriage ends. No negotiations, no second chances. I need to know that you understand this." "I understand. Do you? Do you understand that I'm giving you an opportunity, not a guarantee?" "Yes." Her voice was steady, her eyes meeting mine directly. "I understand that I destroyed something precious, and that the best I can hope for is the chance to rebuild it. I understand that you may never fully trust me again, and that our marriage may not survive even if we both try our hardest. I understand all of that, Fletcher, and I'm grateful for the opportunity, whatever the outcome." I studied her face, looking for signs of the woman who had lied to me for 6 months, for the deception that had been so thoroughly maintained that I had suspected nothing until that accidental glimpse of a text message. But what I saw instead was someone I recognized, my wife, flawed and human, who had made terrible choices but seemed genuinely committed to atoning for them. Could I trust what I was seeing? That was the question that would define the coming months, the question that only time could answer. "Where's Tessa?" I asked. "In her room. She knows something happened. I couldn't hide it from her. But I haven't told her about the affair. We should tell her something. Not everything, but something. She deserves to understand what's happening in her own home." "What do we tell her?" "That we're working through serious problems. That we're committed to trying but uncertain about the outcome. That whatever happens, we both love her and will continue to be her parents regardless of whether we remain each other's spouses." We called Tessa downstairs and delivered the message together, a unified front despite the fractures beneath. She listened with the serious attention of an adolescent facing adult complications, asked questions we answered as honestly as we could, and finally excused herself to process what she had heard. That night, Meredith and I slept in the same bed for the first time since my discovery. Not touching, not intimate, but present in the same space, acknowledging that we were still, at least technically, married. It was a beginning. Whether it would also be an ending remained to be seen. The therapy began the following week. Our therapist was a woman named Dr. Evelyn Torres, recommended by a colleague of Sarah's who specialized in couples work. She was in her 60s, with decades of experience in helping marriages survive crises that most people would consider unsurvivable. I want to start with a question for both of you, she said during our first session. Not about the affair, but about what came before. What was your marriage like before this happened? Meredith and I looked at each other, uncertain who should speak first. Distant, I said finally. We had grown apart without realizing it. I was focused on my career, she was focused on hers, and somewhere along the way we stopped prioritizing each other. Is that how you experienced it? Dr. Torres asked Meredith. Yes, I felt invisible in my own marriage. Fletcher was always at the hospital, always saving other people, and when he came home, he was exhausted and distracted. I tried to connect, but it felt like I was competing with his work and losing. Did you tell him how you felt? I tried, but he would acknowledge the problem and promise to do better, and then nothing would change. After a while, I stopped trying. The session continued, probing the history of our relationship with surgical precision. Dr. Torres wasn't interested in assigning blame. She made that clear from the beginning. She was interested in understanding patterns, identifying the dynamics that had led us to this crisis so that we could address them if we chose to stay together. The affair is a symptom, she explained. A catastrophic symptom, certainly, but still a symptom of underlying problems in the marriage. If we only focus on the affair itself, we miss the chance to address what made it possible. That sounds like you're excusing what she did, I said, bristling at what felt like a minimization of my wife's betrayal. Not at all. Meredith made choices that caused tremendous harm, and she bears full responsibility for those choices. But she made those choices in a context of loneliness, disconnection, and unmet needs. Understanding that context isn't about excusing her behavior, it's about preventing it from happening again. The therapy was grueling. Week after week, we returned to Dr. Torres's office and dissected our marriage with unflinching honesty. We talked about the early years, when passion had made connection easy. We talked about the middle years, when careers and parenting had consumed the energy we once devoted to each other. We talked about the recent years, when the distance had become so normalized that neither of us fully recognized how far apart we had drifted. And we talked about the affair itself, about how it started, how it progressed, how it ended. This was the hardest part for me, hearing details that I would have preferred to remain unknown. But Dr. Torres insisted on transparency, arguing that partial knowledge was more damaging than full knowledge because it left room for imagination to fill the gaps with scenarios worse than reality. I need to know everything, I told Meredith during one particularly difficult session. Everything you did with him, everything you said, everything you felt. I can't move past what I don't understand. And so she told me, not with cruelty or defiance, but with the pained honesty of someone confessing sins they desperately wished they hadn't committed. She told me about the first kiss at the Denver conference, the escalation in Atlanta, the subsequent meetings that became increasingly desperate as the guilt accumulated. She told me about the emotional connection that had developed alongside the physical one, the conversations, the confidences, the sharing of vulnerabilities that should have been reserved for her marriage. Did you love him? I asked. The question hung in the air, and I watched Meredith struggle with how to answer it. I thought I did, she said finally, for a while. But looking back, I think I loved how he made me feel more than I loved him as a person. He was attentive and present in ways that you weren't. But that was because our relationship was new, exciting, uncomplicated by the realities of daily life. If we had actually built a life together, I'm sure we would have developed the same problems. That's not an answer. No, I didn't love him. Not the way I love you. What we had was infatuation, escape, fantasy. Real love is harder and deeper and more complicated. Real love is what I threw away. I wanted to believe her. Every session, every conversation, every tearful confession pushed me toward belief, toward the possibility that our marriage could survive, that we could become something stronger than we had been before. But the doubt persisted. Late at night, lying awake while Meredith slept beside me, I would remember the messages I had read, the explicit details of what she had done with another man. The images would flood my mind, and the anger would return, and I would wonder whether forgiveness was possible or whether I was simply delaying an inevitable ending. The process continued for months, through the fall and winter, through holidays that felt both normal and surreal, through the ordinary routines of family life that had become extraordinary by virtue of what lay beneath them. Slowly, incrementally, something began to shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but something that might eventually lead there. Understanding. I began to understand Meredith's loneliness, the way my dedication to work had created a vacuum that she had tried desperately to fill. I began to understand my own failures, the ways I had taken her for granted, while assuming that the marriage would sustain itself without attention. I began to understand that betrayal, while inexcusable, was not incomprehensible, that ordinary people in ordinary marriages could make terrible choices when their needs went unmet for long enough. And I began to understand that forgiveness was not a single moment, but a process, a daily choice to release resentment, to choose repair over rupture, to believe that the future could be different from the past. The question was whether I was capable of making that choice day after day for the rest of my life. 6 months into the reconciliation process, I discovered something that nearly ended everything. I had been checking Meredith's phone regularly, a condition she had agreed to and that I had exercised with decreasing frequency as trust gradually rebuilt. But something about her demeanor that day triggered my old suspicions. A distracted quality, a reluctance to meet my eyes, the subtle signs of discomfort I had learned to recognize during the months before the confrontation. So I checked, and what I found stopped my heart. A message from Derek. "I've been thinking about you. Can we talk?" The message was 3 hours old. Meredith had seen it, the read receipt was visible, but hadn't responded. I found her in the bedroom, folding laundry with the mechanical efficiency of someone whose mind was elsewhere. I held up her phone, the message visible on the screen, and watched her face go pale. "He contacted me," she said. "I didn't respond. You were supposed to tell me if he reached out. That was the agreement. I know I was going to. I just needed to figure out how to hide it, how to respond without me knowing." "No, Fletcher, I swear, I wasn't going to respond." I was never going to respond, but I knew how it would look, and I was afraid of exactly this reaction. This reaction. You mean the reaction of someone who trusted you, who believed you had changed, and who just discovered that you're keeping secrets again? I'm not keeping secrets. The message came in this afternoon. I read it because I didn't recognize the number. He must have changed phones. And then I sat there trying to decide how to tell you without destroying everything we've rebuilt. I wanted to believe her. Everything in my heart wanted to believe that this was innocent, that her failure to immediately disclose was fear rather than deception, that the progress we had made over 6 months was real and durable. But my mind, trained by months of vigilance and the memory of past betrayal, couldn't accept what my heart wanted to believe. "I'm going to ask you one question," I said, "and if you lie to me, we're done. Not eventually, not after more therapy, but immediately. Understand?" "Yes." "Have you had any contact with Derek since you ended the affair? Any communication of any kind?" "No." Her voice was steady, her eyes meeting mine directly. "I swear on everything I value, on Tessa's life, on whatever future we might have together, I have had no contact with him until this message today." I studied her face, looking for the tells that had become familiar during months of learning to read her more carefully than I ever had before. I saw fear, anxiety, desperation, but I didn't see deception. I didn't see the subtle evasions that had characterized her lies during the affair. "Give me your phone." She handed it over without hesitation. I scrolled through every communication app, every call log, every possible channel through which she might have contacted him. Nothing. No evidence of any communication beyond the single message that had triggered this crisis. "I'm going to verify this," I said. "I'm going to check phone records, email servers, everything I have access to. If there's anything at all, that contradicts what you're telling me..." There won't be. I promise you, Fletcher. I have been completely faithful to our agreement. I have not contacted Derek, not once, not for any reason. I spent the rest of the evening doing exactly what I had threatened, verifying, cross-referencing, searching for any evidence that would contradict her claim. I found nothing. Either she was telling the truth or she had developed deception skills far beyond what she had demonstrated during the original affair. The more likely explanation, I had to admit, was that she was telling the truth. "I'm sorry," I said that night, sitting beside her on the bed where so much damage had been done and so much repair attempted. "I should have given you the benefit of the doubt. You shouldn't have to apologize for not trusting me. I destroyed that trust. It's my job to rebuild it, even when rebuilding means surviving moments like this. You didn't do anything wrong tonight. You received a message you didn't ask for, and your only failure was taking a few hours to figure out how to tell me. But that failure almost cost us everything. It almost cost us everything because I'm still wounded, still defensive, still expecting the worst, even when the evidence suggests the best. That's not your fault. It's just where we are in this process." Meredith leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, and I felt the familiar warmth of her body against mine. For a moment, we were simply a husband and wife, sitting together at the end of a difficult day, bound by history and effort, and the complicated love that survives betrayal. "Do you think we're going to make it?" she asked. "I don't know, but I think we might. And tonight, that feels like enough." The incident with Derek's message became, paradoxically, a turning point in our reconciliation. Not because it proved Meredith's trustworthiness, though it did help with that, but because it forced me to confront the limits of what vigilance could achieve. I couldn't spend the rest of my life checking her phone, monitoring her communications, treating every variation in her behavior as potential evidence of renewed betrayal. That wasn't a marriage. It was a surveillance operation. If our relationship was going to survive, it would have to be because I chose to trust her, not because I had eliminated every possibility of deception. The choice wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't simply return because you decide it should. It has to be rebuilt through countless small moments, through promises kept and transparency maintained, through difficult conversations navigated with honesty, through the daily accumulation of evidence that the person you're trusting has actually become trustworthy. But at some point you have to make a leap. You have to decide that the evidence is sufficient, that the person has changed enough, that the risk of continued distrust outweighs the risk of renewed betrayal. I made that leap on a Tuesday in April, 9 months after I had first seen the message on Meredith's phone. We were sitting in Dr. Torres's office, discussing progress and setbacks as we had done dozens of times before. But something felt different that day, lighter, less fraught, as if we had emerged from a tunnel into open air. "I want to change the frequency of our sessions," I said. "Not because we're done working, but because I think we've reached a point where we can do more of this work on our own." Dr. Torres nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's a significant step. What's prompting it?" "I've decided to trust my wife again. Not blindly, not completely, but genuinely. I've stopped checking her phone every day. I've stopped analyzing her behavior for signs of deception. I've started assuming good faith instead of bad. And how does that feel? Terrifying. And also liberating. I've been carrying so much vigilance, so much suspicion for so long. Putting it down feels like, I don't know, like learning to breathe again." Meredith reached for my hand, her eyes bright with tears. "I know what you're giving me," she said. "The gift of a second chance that I didn't earn and don't deserve. I won't waste it." "I know you won't." That evening, we went out to dinner, just the two of us, at a restaurant where we had celebrated our 5th anniversary. The setting was deliberate, a callback to a time when our marriage had felt unshakable, when betrayal was something that happened to other people. "I've been thinking about the future," Meredith said over dessert. "Not just surviving day to day, but actually building something. Travel we've been postponing, experiences we've been deferring. What if we started doing some of those things?" "Like what?" Like that trip to Italy we've been talking about since before Tessa was born. Or the cooking class you always wanted to take. Or just, I don't know, adventures. Things that aren't work or therapy or the daily grind of trying to repair what's been broken. I'd like that. Really, really. We've spent 9 months focused on what went wrong. Maybe it's time to focus on what could go right. The shift wasn't instantaneous. Nothing in our reconciliation had been instantaneous, but it was real. We began planning the Italy trip, scheduling weekend excursions, making time for the kind of spontaneous enjoyment that had been impossible when every interaction was shadowed by suspicion and hurt. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, something began to heal, not the way a bone heals, returning to exactly what it was before, more like the way scar tissue forms, different from the original, but strong in its own way, capable of bearing weight that might once have been impossible. Tessa noticed the change before we fully recognized it ourselves. "You guys seem happy," she said one evening, watching us prepare dinner together in a way we hadn't done in years. Like, actually happy, not just pretending. "We're working on it," I said. "Is it working?" "I think so. I hope so." "Good," she smiled, the genuine smile of a teenager relieved to see her parents functioning as partners rather than combatants. "I like seeing you like this. It reminds me of how you used to be when I was little." That observation stayed with me long after Tessa had returned to her homework. How we used to be, before careers consumed us, before distance replaced connection, before the affair destroyed what remained of our intimacy. Could we become that again? Not the same. Too much had happened for sameness, but something analogous. A couple who laughed together, supported each other, built a life that neither would choose to abandon. For the first time in a year, I believed we could. The Italy trip happened in June, a 2-week journey through Tuscany that we had been promising ourselves since before Tessa's birth. We left our daughter with Meredith's sister, trusting her to manage a 17-year-old who was increasingly capable of managing herself, and boarded a plane for Rome with the giddy nervousness of newlyweds. Italy was everything we had hoped it would be. Beautiful, romantic, a world away from the stresses and strains that had nearly destroyed us. We wandered through ancient streets, ate meals that stretched for hours, drank wine on terraces overlooking landscapes that hadn't changed in centuries, and we talked. Not about the affair, not about therapy, not about the careful reconstruction of trust that had consumed the past year. We talked about other things, about our dreams and fears, about our hopes for Tessa's future, about the people we wanted to become in the second half of our lives. "I've been thinking about my career," I said one evening sitting on the balcony of our hotel in Florence, "about the balance between work and life that I've gotten so wrong for so long. What are you thinking? That maybe it's time to make some changes. Not leave medicine entirely, but step back from the intensity, take fewer shifts, mentor younger physicians instead of trying to do everything myself, have more evenings like this, more time for the things that actually matter. The hospital would survive without you." I know, that's what I've been so afraid to admit. I've made myself indispensable because being indispensable felt safer than being replaceable. But the truth is, everyone is replaceable professionally. The only place I'm not replaceable is here, with you and Tessa. Meredith took my hand, her touch no longer triggering the complicated emotions it had evoked during the worst months of our reconciliation. "I've been thinking about my career too, about the choices I made that led to everything. You already changed jobs. I'm talking about something more fundamental, about the way I defined myself through professional success, the way I let my identity become dependent on external validation. That's what made me vulnerable to Derek. He offered validation I wasn't getting at work or at home, and I was so hungry for it that I made catastrophically bad choices. And now I'm trying to find validation from within, to be comfortable with who I am, not just with what I achieve. It's hard. It's the hardest work I've ever done, but I think I'm making progress." We sat in silence for a while, watching the lights of Florence twinkle in the gathering darkness. The city had witnessed countless human dramas over its centuries of existence, loves and betrayals, triumphs and tragedies, the endless cycle of destruction and renewal that characterized all human endeavors. Our story was just one more in that endless procession, neither more nor less significant than the millions that had come before. But it was ours, and we were still writing it. "I love you," I said. The words came easily now, unguarded by the suspicion and hurt that had made them difficult to say during the early months of reconciliation. "I love you too, more than I knew how to show when it would have mattered most. It matters now. Does it? Can now make up for then? I don't know. But I'm willing to find out." The trip marked a transition from the active work of reconciliation to the quieter work of maintaining what we had rebuilt. We returned to Chicago changed, not dramatically but meaningfully, carrying with us the knowledge that our marriage could survive what would have destroyed many others. The months that followed were different from any period in our relationship. Not better than the early years. Nothing could recapture the uncomplicated joy of new love, but deeper, more intentional, built on understanding that had come at tremendous cost. I reduced my hours at the hospital. As I had promised, the transition was difficult, letting go of identity I had built over decades, but the rewards were immediate. More evenings at home, more weekends free, more opportunities to be present for the family I had almost lost. Meredith continued her own transformation, working with a therapist to address the deeper issues that had made her vulnerable to the affair. She became, gradually, more grounded, less dependent on external validation, more comfortable with uncertainty and imperfection. And our marriage became something new, not the naive partnership we had started with, not the damaged relationship we had discovered, but a third thing, weathered and wiser, scarred, but strong. 2 years after I first saw the message on Meredith's phone, something unexpected happened. Tessa was preparing for college, sorting through the accumulated possessions of 18 years of life, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. She had been accepted to Northwestern, close enough to visit but far enough to feel independent, and her departure was approaching with the speed that all transitions seem to acquire as they draw near. "Dad," she called from her room, "can you come help me with something?" I found her sitting on her bed, surrounded by boxes and childhood memorabilia, holding something I didn't immediately recognize. "I found this in the back of my closet," she said, holding up a small digital camera. "Remember this? You gave it to me for my 12th birthday." I remember. I hadn't looked at it in years, but I started going through the photos and... She paused, her expression uncertain. "There are some you might want to see." She handed me the camera, and I scrolled through the images. Most were what you would expect: birthday parties, family vacations, the everyday moments that children capture without understanding their significance. But near the end, there were several photos I didn't recognize. They showed Meredith and me, captured without our knowledge in moments of ordinary intimacy, reading on the couch together, cooking dinner side by side, dancing in the kitchen to music only we could hear. The images were simple, unposed, and unbearably touching. "When did you take these?" I asked. "Over several years, I think. I went through a phase where I was obsessed with documentary photography. I would take pictures of everything, including you and Mom when you didn't know I was watching. Why are you showing them to me?" Tessa was quiet for a moment. "Because I know what happened. Not the details, but the general shape. You and Mom almost split up 2 years ago, and you've been working to rebuild ever since. We never told you. You didn't have to. I'm not blind, Dad. I saw the pain, the distance, the long conversations behind closed doors. I knew something terrible had happened, and I knew you were trying to fix it. I didn't know what to say. We had tried so hard to protect Tessa from the worst of what we were going through, to maintain the fiction that our family was intact, even as we fought to make that fiction true. These photos," Tessa continued, "are why I never gave up hope, because I could see it, the love that was still there, even when everything was falling apart, the way you looked at each other when you didn't know anyone was watching. I knew that if you could get back to that, you would be okay. And are we okay? You tell me. You're the ones living it. I looked at the photos again, at the captured moments of connection that had existed alongside the distance, the glimpses of the marriage we had been neglecting even as we tried to sustain it. We're okay, I said. Better than okay. We almost lost everything, and we used the near loss to build something stronger than what we had before. I'm glad. Tessa took the camera back, scrolling through the images one more time. I want this for myself someday. A relationship that can survive the hard stuff, that gets stronger instead of falling apart. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing either of us has ever done. I know, but it seems worth it. It is. Absolutely worth it. Later that evening, I showed the photos to Meredith. She looked at them with the same wonder I had felt, amazement that these moments had been captured, that our daughter had witnessed what we thought we had been hiding. She knew. Meredith said. All along she knew. Kids always know more than we think. I was so worried about damaging her, about what my choices would do to her understanding of love and marriage. And now? Now I think maybe she's learned something valuable, that love is fragile but also resilient, that people can fail each other catastrophically and still find their way back. That's a pretty good lesson. It's the lesson I wish I had learned before any of this happened. Before I made choices that almost destroyed everything. I pulled her close, feeling the familiar shape of her body against mine, the connection that had survived devastation and emerged transformed. We can't change what happened, I said. We can only shape what comes next. And what comes next? Everything. Everything we want to build, everything we want to experience, everything we want to become. The affair was the worst thing that ever happened to us, but it wasn't the end of our story. It was just a chapter, the darkest chapter but not the final one. Tessa left for Northwestern on a bright September morning, 3 years after the evening when everything had changed. We drove her to campus, helped her move into her dorm, and then stood in the parking lot saying goodbye while trying to hide the tears that marked this transition. "Don't be strangers," she said, hugging each of us in turn. "I expect regular visits, phone calls, embarrassing parent behavior at every opportunity." "We'll deliver on all fronts," Meredith promised. "And you too, keep working on things. I like who you've become together." The drive home was quiet, both of us processing the end of an era. The house would be empty now, the routines of active parenting replaced by the uncertain rhythms of whatever came next. "What do we do now?" Meredith asked as we pulled into our driveway. "I don't know. We've spent 18 years raising a child. Now we get to find out who we are without that purpose." "Does that scare you?" "Yes, but it also excites me. We have decades left, decades we almost didn't have together. I want to use them well." We entered the house, quieter now, somehow larger in the absence of our daughter's presence, and stood in the kitchen where so much had happened. The confrontation, the difficult conversations, the gradual rebuilding of a marriage that had seemed beyond repair. "I want to tell you something," I said. "What?" 3 years ago, when I found out about the affair, I was certain our marriage was over. I couldn't imagine forgiving you, couldn't imagine trusting you again, couldn't imagine ever looking at you without seeing Derek's face. And now, when I look at you, I see my wife, the woman I married, the mother of our child, the partner I want to spend the rest of my life with. The affair happened. It's part of our history, but it's not the defining element anymore. It's just one chapter in a much longer story. You really feel that way. I really feel that way. Not every day, not every moment. Some days the old pain still surfaces, and I have to choose forgiveness all over again. But most of the time, most of the days, what I feel is gratitude. Gratitude that we didn't give up, that we fought through the hardest thing either of us has ever faced, that we came out the other side with something worth having. Meredith was crying, the good kind of tears, the kind that come from relief and joy rather than pain. "I don't deserve this," she said. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, your trust, your continued love." Maybe not, but deserve has nothing to do with it. Love isn't about what people deserve. It's about what we choose to give. I choose to give you my love, my trust, my future. Every day I make that choice, and every day you prove that the choice was right. We held each other in the kitchen, where so much had been broken and repaired, where words spoken in anger had nearly ended everything, and words spoken in hope had helped rebuild it. "What happens now?" Meredith asked. "Now we live, we travel, we grow, we become whoever we're meant to become in the years we have left. We visit Tessa, we build new routines, we discover what our marriage looks like without the daily demands of parenting." That sounds wonderful. It does, and scary, and uncertain, and absolutely worth pursuing. The house was quiet around us, the September light slanting through the windows, the future stretching before us like an unwritten story waiting to be told. 3 years ago, my wife had pushed me away and said words that shattered my understanding of my marriage. "Get out, I've been touched enough today." Those words had set in motion a cascade of discovery, confrontation, and painful reconstruction that had nearly destroyed everything we had built together. But nearly isn't the same as actually. We had survived, more than survived. We had transformed. The marriage that existed now was not the same as the marriage that had existed before the affair, but it was stronger, more intentional, built on foundations that had been tested and proven solid. I didn't know what the future held. No one ever does. But I knew that whatever came, Meredith and I would face it together, not as the naive couple we had been when we married, but as the weathered partners we had become through crisis and recovery. That evening, as the sun set on our first day as empty nesters, Meredith and I sat on the back patio with glasses of wine, watching the sky change colors as day gave way to night. "To us," she said, raising her glass. "To us," I agreed. "To everything we've been, everything we are, and everything we're going to become." We drank and watched the stars emerge and felt the quiet contentment of two people who had nearly lost each other and had found their way back. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.